Hello everyone and welcome to The No Show. I'll be your host Nathan Orenstein, and today I'm going to be ranking every movie in the Mission Impossible franchise. Mission Impossible has become one of the most beloved action series of all time, kicking off in 1996 and continuing till 2025, and it's become known for its consistent quality through the decades. It's unclear whether or not the series is done for good, or Tom Cruise is done for good playing Ethan Hunt, or if everything's proceeding as normal, but it felt like a good time to rank all 8 movies in the series regardless. If you've never seen any of these movies, they star Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt, top agent of the Impossible Mission Force, or IMF. The films feature plenty of death-defying stunts and massive action set pieces, as well as a lot of espionage and futuristic tech like masks and voice modulators that let the user become pretty much anyone they want to emulate. I feel like that's pretty much everything you need to know if you're unfamiliar with the series. So without further ado, let's get into it. At number 8, we have 2000's Mission Impossible 2, directed by John Woo. This pick won't come as a surprise to anyone who's familiar with the franchise, and it was honestly a no-brainer for me to throw at the bottom. In this one, Hunt's forced to stop the bad guys from getting a hold of a biological weapon known as the Chimera virus. How's he going to do it? Well, obviously he's going to send his new thief girlfriend, who he pretty much just met, to go get it from the bad guy, who is, of course, her ex. The plot is flimsy at best, and it doesn't help that Tom Cruise and Tandy Wayne-Newton have absolutely no chemistry, which is kind of an issue when the movie's trying its darndest to do a sexy James Bond thing. But the real issue for me is honestly everything else. Ethan, for whatever reason, is now some sort of cocky womanizer with a devil-may-care attitude. It honestly feels like a parody of Tom Cruise, but being played by Tom Cruise himself. As for the action, we're gifted John Woo's incessant use of stop motion and editing that feels like death by 1,000 cuts. The finished product has a mediocre story, a bad central romance, a bad protagonist, and action that's filmed in such a way that it feels like it's trying to nauseate you. The powers that be know this sucks too, as it's the only film in the franchise that pretty much never ever gets referenced in subsequent films. It's like it never existed in the first place, and honestly, I wish that were the case. At number 7, we have 2025's The Final Reckoning, directed by Christopher McQuarrie. Man, it pains me to put this one so low, but I really can't justify putting it any higher. This is a direct continuation of the events of Dead Reckoning, so I'll hold off on talking about the story until we get to that one. But I will say that I don't think The Final Reckoning does much of anything to improve upon it. There's also a lot of story here. This is a 2-hour and 50-minute long movie, so you'd think it'd be jammed-packed with action. You'd be mistaken, and I wouldn't be surprised if this has the least total action of any of the films in the franchise. The first 2 hours are nearly entirely story and exposition between new characters that I already didn't love from Dead Reckoning, about a villain that I think is the lamest in the series. Again, I'll get to it later. The film's decision to pretty much split Ethan up from his team for the majority of the film is a baffling one too, especially since the past few movies have shown us that Ethan's greatest strength and his greatest weakness is his unwavering loyalty to his crew, and separating him from them pretty much just eliminates that angle altogether. The action we do get is awesome, specifically the biplane sequence that's been plastered all over the marketing, but it's really not enough to carry a film that's already pretty mediocre. They've decided to mostly abandon any sort of espionage stuff too, and sadly the iconic masks only get one pretty quick scene. But for a movie so intent on eliminating everything that made the previous entry so great, there's an awful lot of fan service here. The first hour or so is absolutely loaded with flashbacks to previous films, literally just replaying footage in montages. And there are a whole bunch of callbacks to older films that hardly feel natural at all, some even feel goofy. It's genuinely shocking to me how this turned out, especially considering it was directed by franchise vet Christopher McQuarrie. A massive disappointment for me, and a sad way to end things for the franchise if this really is the end. At number 6, we have 2006's Mission Impossible 3, directed by J.J. Abrams. It didn't take long until we hit the good movies, and it kind of feels wrong ranking this so low. There's a lot of competition in this franchise, though. The film opens with semi-retired IMF instructor Ethan Hunt celebrating his engagement to his fiancée Julia. who of course has no idea what his line of work actually is. Fast forward a bit, and Philip Seymour Hoffman's Owen Davian has kidnapped Julia, and Ethan has to get her back by bringing Davian the mysterious rabbit's foot. Mission Impossible 3 is the darkest film in the franchise, and while I'm not sure it fits the series super well, I do think it's a pretty interesting deviation. Hoffman's Owen Davian is without a doubt the most ruthless villain in the series, and his complete power over Ethan the entire film is menacing. This is also the first film where Ethan feels like a real human being, and seeing him grapple with the morality of his dilemma is really compelling, as well as his fierce desire to protect his fiancée. MI3 is also notable for introducing us to Simon Pegg's Benji, who will go on to become a staple of the franchise. What ultimately drags Mission Impossible 3 down to 6th place is that it's just kind of forgettable. The action is all good, but not much of it really stands out in the sea of great action sequences that is the Mission Impossible series. The same goes for the story, which is highlighted by Ethan and Owen's pure hatred for each other, but is a pretty standard bring me the thing and you can get your girl back narrative. Overall, a very strong film, but not one that ranks particularly well amongst the rest of the series. At number 5, we have 2023's Dead Reckoning, directed by Christopher McQuarrie. Like I mentioned earlier, this is part 1 of the story that gets finished in the final reckoning. It's about an AI known as the Entity that gains sentience and goes rogue, enlisting the help of Gabriel, who has personal ties to Ethan from before he even joined the IMF. Ethan and his team seek out a key that will eventually allow them to access the entity's source code and shut it down. Right off the bat, I gotta say that I'm not a fan of the writing in Dead Reckoning much at all. For one, the story is pretty goofy, even for Mission Impossible standards, as it pretty much sees Ethan and the IMF going up against a god. The Entity is an all-powerful, all-knowing, untouchable being that is everywhere at once and always one step ahead. The movie also floods the series with new characters that I really don't care about personally at all, and kinda just serve to crowd the cast. And the dialogue, both in its writing and its delivery, is so melodramatic, to the point where it almost feels like a soap opera. That was an awful lot of complaining for a movie that I think is actually very good. That's because Dead Reckoning absolutely delivers on pretty much everything else you'd want from one of these movies. There's great espionage, there's great shootouts, there's great hand-to-hand fights, and there's of course legendary stunts. The entire train sequence that makes up the final act of the film is perhaps my favorite act of any of these movies, fitting in everything I just mentioned, but in the microcosm of a single set piece. Like the final Reckoning, this one also approaches that 3-hour runtime, but the difference is that Dead Reckoning absolutely flies by. There aren't a ton of action sequences, but they each get the maximum bang for their buck and squeeze every bit of potential out of them. The melodrama and the bloated cast list and the dumb villain are annoying for sure, but they're far from enough to stop this thing from kicking ass. At number 4, we have 2011's Ghost Protocol, directed by Brad Bird. The top half of this list is just banger after banger, so I apologize if I don't have much negative to distinguish these films from each other. Anyways, Ghost Protocol, to me, is the film that really established the formula that the Mission Impossible series has been following ever since. There's an emphasis on big set pieces with crazy practical stunts. There's a bigger emphasis on the members of Ethan's team, and they aren't just sidekicks you'll immediately forget anymore. There's more of a sense of continuity, with each subsequent film feeling like a legitimate continuation of Ethan's story. And it's the first film where Benji's a field agent. Good for him. Let's go back to the set pieces, though. Ghost Protocol features the Burj Khalifa climb, which has become the most recognizable stunt from the entire franchise, and for good reason. The entire sequence, though, like the train sequence I just mentioned, really does include everything that makes the franchise so great. This is also the one where Ethan infiltrates the Kremlin and escapes from prison, both incredible sequences in their own right, too. My biggest gripe with Ghost Protocol is honestly that I just don't think it fully sticks the landing, especially after such a phenomenal first and second act. And the villain is also extremely forgettable, as is the story as a whole. Even then, it makes up for it by humanizing its central characters and making their camaraderie more of a focal point, a change that will do the series very well going forward. Overall, this is a great entry and a pivotal one for the series too. At number 3, we have 1996's Mission Impossible, directed by Brian De Palma. It starts with Ethan's entire team being methodically eliminated one by one during a mission, forcing Ethan into hiding. When the IMF suspects him of double-crossing them, he has no choice but to form a new ragtag team and obtain what's known as the knock list so that the IMF can trust him again. While the original Mission Impossible might seem small scale to what would eventually follow, it's still an airtight action spy thriller. There's not a single minute of fat on this movie's bones, as De Palma's direction has such a strong vision and the narrative is always keeping you on your toes. If anything, it's probably a little too convoluted, featuring enough backstabbing and deception to fill at least a couple of these movies, but it really is a ton of fun. This is a young and paranoid Ethan Hunt who's forced to think on his feet while still taking massive risks, which of course leads us to the Langley infiltration, in which Ethan breaks into the CIA headquarters. It's one of the greatest moments in the series, with Ethan dangling mere inches above the ground from a ceiling vent, and it's nearly as iconic as the Burj Khalifa stunt. We're also introduced to Ving Rhames' Luther Stickle here, an incredibly talented hacker who is the only other character besides Ethan who appears in every single one of these films. Admittedly, Mission Impossible does feel pretty dated by today's standards, especially with some of the CGI in the final action sequence, but its other more dated elements only add to its charm in my opinion. The masks make their first appearance, but we also get explosive chewing gum and glasses with cameras in them. Who could imagine that? Mission Impossible is rough around the edges for sure, but to me, it's one of the greatest pure espionage movies of the past 30 years. At number 2, we have 2015's Rogue Nation, directed by Christopher McQuarrie. The IMF must stop the Syndicate, a group of rogue, anarchist government agents from around the globe, led by the mysterious Solomon Lane. It's actually kind of wild to me that this isn't at number 1, because this is pretty damn close to being a perfect action movie. For one, the action scenes here are probably the best collection of action scenes the series has ever provided. We've got Tom Cruise hanging from the door of a plane. We've got him nearly drowning in an underwater data vault. We've got an insane motorcycle chase. And of course, we have the opera scene, which is my favorite sequence of the entire franchise. The espionage isn't put on the back burner either, as there are plenty of great sneaky bits that support all the action. We're also introduced to Rebecca Ferguson's Ilsa Faust, who, with the exception of Ethan Hunt, is the best character in all of Mission Impossible. She's an extremely deadly, disavowed MI6 agent with no obvious allegiances, except a strange and mysterious faithfulness to Ethan. Solomon Lane is also my favorite villain in the franchise. Though not as outwardly evil and imposing as Hoffman's Owen Davian, Lane is quiet and cryptic, preferring to do his work from the shadows, and played masterfully by Sean Harris. This is also the film that introduced us to director Christopher McQuarrie, who has gone on to direct every subsequent film in the franchise. You really wouldn't know this was his first in the series, though, as he feels like he's been doing this his entire career. After singing the praises of Rogue Nation this much, it feels even more wrong that it doesn't take the number 1 spot, but to me, there was no other choice at the top. Because at number 1, we have 2018's Fallout, directed by Christopher McQuarrie. The core story here honestly isn't too far off from Rogue Nation. Solomon Lane's syndicate has reorganized as a smaller, more dangerous group known as the Apostles. They work with an unknown figure named John Lark to secure 3 plutonium cores to be used for 3 nuclear bombs. And obviously, the IMF has to stop them. Yes, it's pretty much the same group of bad guys led by the same villain, but everything else feels fresh. For one, we're back to the original Mission Impossible's level of deception and backstabbing. It's all over this one, but never feels as overwhelming as in the original. And this is really the best the series has ever been at painting Ethan Hunt as a human being with human being issues. He's so protective of his team and his loved ones to the point where it nearly ruins things for him. Watching him grapple with his loyalty to the mission and his loyalty to them is at its most compelling here and is a constant point of note across the movie. It adds a real sense of heaviness to every decision made amongst Ethan, Luther, Benji, and Ilsa, and it's all in opposition to Solomon Lane, who, as I already said, is my favorite villain in the series. Henry Cavill also joins the team, and his blunt, kill first, think later approach to everything makes for an interesting dynamic between him and Ethan. And then there's, of course, the action. It's not quite as spectacular as Rogue Nation, but it's pretty damn close. fistfights, shootouts, chases in cars, chases on streets, chases on roofs, chases in helicopters, and a finale that happens entirely under the threat of nuclear fallout. This is my personal favorite Mission Impossible film, and it's my personal favorite action film of all time. I hope you enjoyed my ranking of every Mission Impossible movie, and I'd love to see your own ranking down in the comments below. And feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.